Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. We've been talking a lot about the non-prosecution agreement for a few weeks now, and as we get prepared for this non-prosecution agreement to go in front of the 11th Circuit Court on December 3rd, I thought it would be the perfect time to pull out an article from 2009 that was run by the Palm Beach Post. And even at the time, 2009, when they talked about the non-prosecution agreement and former federal prosecutors talked about the whole situation surrounding it, it was very irregular even then. The people that knew what the deal entailed and the prosecutors who used to work for the federal government who had an idea about what it entailed couldn't believe what they were seeing. So when people talk about how, I had no idea what was going on and we had no idea what Jeffrey Epstein was, it's a bunch of BS. From this first investigation, just the one in Palm Beach, there was 30, 40, 50 girls involved in that first investigation. And these are high school girls from the Palm Beach area, the surrounding areas, etc., etc. All of those girls were investigated. It was all in the report. And all of these people who act like they had no idea what Jeffrey Epstein was are obviously lying. But at the time, in 2009, it was apparent even then that this non-prosecution agreement was straight garbage. So, like I said, this article is from 2009. It was published on June 10th of 2009. And the headline, Epstein's secret pact with feds reveals highly unusual terms. And this article was posted in the palmbeachpost.com. I can't find a author, so I'm wondering if it was just staff. But either way, the article will be posted in the description box like usual, the link to the article, so you can go check it out yourself. A secret non-prosecution agreement with multi-millionaire financier, pedophile, Jeffrey Epstein, struck with federal prosecutors, is being called highly unusual by former federal prosecutors and downright outrageous by attorneys now representing young women who were victimized by him. So, even then, all right, you had the prosecutors calling it highly unusual, and the attorneys for the survivors, well, these guys obviously knew that this shit didn't pass the sniff test. How many clients had they represented on the other side of things? How many times were they representing people charged criminally? And I bet you their clients never ever walked out of there with one of these kind of deals. Oh yeah, this deal's for me, my friend, my other friend's friend, their cousin, their nephew Joseph, their cousin John, Michael McGee, and really? It's all a bunch of BS. Nobody gets those kind of deals. And these lawyers knew that. The deal reveals that the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office investigated him for several federal crimes, including engaging minors in commercial sex. So, child prostitution, I'm using air quotes, basically the abuse of children, since children can't consent to be prostitutes, and we're talking about girls that are 14, 15 in some cases here. We're not talking about 19 or 20-year-old girls. We're talking about 14, 15, 16 years old in some cases. And commercial sex, that is what the terminology used in the article. Now remember, this is all the way back in 2009, right? So the terminology certainly isn't what it is today when you have a lot of these outlets who have wised up and started calling these gals survivors instead of victims, etc., etc. So you see that here too, and how much things have changed, especially since the Me Too situation occurred. The crimes are punishable by anywhere from 10 years to life in prison. Imagine, and he got 13 months, folks. 13 measly-ass months that wasn't even real time. He wasn't eating bologna sandwiches, right? He was watching as much TV as he wanted from his office. His 13-hour adventures while he wasn't being kept in the stockade, and he was out gallivanting all around Lord knows where, abusing Lord knows who, under the supervision of some obviously lame-ass, easily paid-off so-called guard. How does any of this sit comfortably with anybody? Especially now when we have hindsight to guide us when we're looking back at things like this. It is just so abhorrent what occurred, and it is beyond negligent, right? There's negligence, and then there is willful negligence, and that's what we have here, in my opinion. But federal prosecutors backed down and agreed to recall grand jury subpoenas if Epstein pleaded guilty to prostitution-related felonies in state court, which he ultimately did. He received an 18-month jail sentence, of which he served 13 months. And again, I know people that have served 7-8 years for way less than what Jeffrey Epstein was involved in. Victimless crimes, money crimes, right? And these people get 6-7 years for something as mundane as quote-unquote illegal sports gambling. But Jeffrey Epstein, his friends, they get the non-prosecution agreement. They get that cush stockade life. They get to do whatever the hell they want whenever they want. Oh, you just got to come here and sleep here at night, Jeffrey. But we'll keep the door open. You can go to the room to watch TV, etc., etc. And I know a lot of people are pissed off at Acosta, and I get it. Acosta's a dirtbag, a spineless scumbag. But he ain't where all of our furor and fury should rest. He should get a little taste of it, which he has already. And if there are any more sanctions that could be brought to upon him, or if there's anything negligent criminally that can be found, then yeah, he should be charged. But besides that, I don't hear Mukasey's name brought up nowhere near enough, or his underlings, Philippe and the rest of them. So I think that it's just like if you're trying to get rid of a drug problem in a neighborhood. You don't go and bust the street level dealers. I mean, you do, but you're not. You're just spinning your wheels. They're just going to have the next block boy up, moving, and ready to take over with a pocket full of stones. And it's the same stuff here. The U.S. Attorney's Office also agreed not to charge any of Epstein's possible co-conspirators, Sarah Kellen, Adriana Ross, Leslie Groff, and Nadia Marcinkova, a.k.a. the Core Four. And we all know what sort of important, intimate role all four of them had in their capacity as far as working with and for Jeffrey Epstein. We know that they were integral to the situation going off without a hitch, to everything running smoothly, and for all cylinders to be firing at the same time. And they all worked in coordination in this criminal enterprise, with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell pulling the strings. The deal was negotiated in part by heavyweight New York criminal defense attorney Gerald Lefcourt. Now, Gerald Lefcourt's an interesting cat, right? He's on record saying that Epstein was a major donor to the Clinton Global Initiative to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. So Gerald Lefcourt is a pretty credible guy, right? I mean, he's a big-time lawyer. Wouldn't just be saying that shit if it wasn't true. So that's another question that people haven't really dug too deep on. What the hell was Jeffrey Epstein getting in return for giving Bill Clinton and his foundation so much money? And then also remember, Ghislaine Maxwell's nephew, Alexander DeRossi, well, he had himself a nice cush job at the State Department under, you guessed it, Hillary Clinton. And it would be nice if the legacy media would start connecting some of these dots. It would be nice if they asked a couple of hard questions, a few rude questions perhaps. I mean, we see it on a daily basis right now. So what's the difference? Why don't they want to ask Clinton these hard questions? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Because the ties between the Clintons and Epstein are just completely over the top. And now again, I'm not saying Bill Clinton was abusing girls with Jeffrey Epstein. There's nobody who has come out and said that yet. There's no evidence of that. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about their connection financially, their connection professionally, and, that's right, their connection personally. Bill Clinton and Jeffrey Epstein were thick as thieves. And Gerald Lefcourt coming out and talking about how Epstein was such a huge donor to get the initiative for Clinton off of the ground. It's a big deal that a lot of people overlook. Unsealed on Friday after attorneys for some of Epstein's survivors and the Palm Beach Post sought its release, it offers the first public look at the deal Epstein's high-powered legal counsel brokered on his behalf. And there's a problem, right, folks, when we're relying on local outlets like the Palm Beach Post or the Miami Herald even to be the ones to force this into light. This should just be transparency expected right away in situations such as these. This is not some sort of national security situation. This is not some sort of new weapons that have to be protected kind of situation. It is nothing like that. It is something that all of us as taxpayers and as citizens should have access to. Of course, anything that could harm survivors, redact their names, obviously. I'm talking about the overall documentation. It should be out there, it should be public, and there shouldn't be any of this, oh, it's sealed and it's hidden and you can't see it, blah, blah, blah. That stuff is all garbage. I'm really sick of that stuff, honestly. Mark Johnson of Stewart, a former federal prosecutor, described the disparity in potential sentences as unusual, but even more so a provision on attorney payment. So there's a lot, right, that goes into this. And let's just start with the disparity of potential sentences. That is highly unusual. In fact, it is unheard of. It's the only time a deal like this has ever been struck in the United States, according to many people who are familiar with the circumstances. And do you want me to believe, with all of the other things that have occurred in this case, with all of the people that Epstein was buddy-buddy with, that all of this just happened to be a coincidence? All of this is a coincidence. I'm sorry, but I cannot agree with that or buy into that. The first draft of the agreement in September 2007 required that Epstein pay an attorney tapped by the U.S. Attorney's Office and approved by Epstein to represent some of the survivors. That attorney is prominent Miami lawyer Bob Josephsberg. Now, again, another little nugget, right? We don't talk about this too much either. And that first draft of the agreement that had the requirement to pay Josephsberg to represent some of the victims is just way beyond weird. I mean, way, way, way beyond weird. Epstein shouldn't have anything to do with providing a lawyer for those he victimized. So the whole thing was foobar. The whole thing was trash. The whole thing was garbage. And I can only hope that the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals will act in a manner that is fitting of people who are there to uphold justice. And if not, I swear, if it was me, if I was one of the lawyers involved in this, I would go all the way to the Supreme Court if I had to. Whatever it takes, folks, because it's obvious that this non-prosecution agreement has to go. The only thing that's propping it up is our technicalities and the fact that the government doesn't want that egg on their face. But an addendum to the agreement signed the following month struck Epstein's duty to pay Josephsberg if he and the victims did not accept settlements, capped at $150,000, and instead pursued lawsuits. Sure sounds a lot like the fund that they set up, huh? The Survivors Fund. Now, I get why they would set that up to expedite the payments, but this is the kind of shit that these girls have been dealing with forever. People like Epstein, what's 150,000 racks to Jeffrey Epstein? So for Jeffrey Epstein, a couple of pennies and some pocket lint is all it takes for him to get off on abusing children, on him abusing the most exposed amongst us. That's all it takes, huh? $150,000. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a lot of money, right, for the average folks, for us, but for Jeffrey Epstein, that ain't shit. And he was obviously more than willing to pay that off and to pay these girls for their silence. And $150,000? Give me a break, that's insulting. Johnson said it appears the government was trying to balance the lesser sentence for Epstein with recovering $150,000 for each survivor. I've never ever seen anything like that in my life, he said. It's highly unusual. Yeah, it's basically gag money, right? And the government was helping facilitate it. So that's that. Look, this is the history of the case here, folks, right? This isn't me making it up. This isn't me just speculating here. This is what occurred. This is what occurred right here in black and white, and it's some of the stuff that's forgotten about, stuff that we might not talk about too much, stuff that doesn't come up in the newer articles too much, and that's why it's important to go back and yank these older articles and add them to the catalog and go through them, because this is crazy. The government facilitating $150,000 in hush money, basically? And you mean to tell me? No, the question I guess I should ask is the 11th Circuit Court going to have this in front of them as well? Or are they going to just, forget about this, just like what we learned from the, air quote, internal investigation by the DOJ? The deal does not say whether any survivors were contacted or consulted before the deal was made. They obviously weren't. And that's the big rub here. That's one of the things that the 11th Circuit Court is going to be looking at. Were all the parameters followed? Was the law followed to a T? And it most certainly was not. And all you have to do is look at those amicus briefs filed by the lawmakers who actually wrote this law. So I would think that the 11th Circuit Court would have that information in front of them, at the very least, those amicus briefs, I mean. Attorney Brad Edwards of Fort Lauderdale, who represents 3 of the young women, believes that none of the 30 to 40 women identified as victims in the federal investigation were told ahead of time. Edwards said his clients received letters from the U.S. Attorney's Office months after the deal was signed, assuring them Epstein would be prosecuted. 30 to 40 women. 30 to 40 women. And I bet you they weren't women, folks, okay? We're going to say children, because we know what he was doing in Palm Beach. We know about the sex pyramid scheme he had running there. And we know how prolific he was when it comes to abusing girls in Palm Beach, and high school age at that. So, again, in hindsight, this is all very damning for them. Very, very damning for them and their hopes of keeping this NPA in place. Never consulting the survivors is probably the most outrageous aspect of it, Edwards said. It taught them that someone with money can buy his way out of anything. It's outrageous and embarrassing for United States attorneys' offices and states' attorneys' offices. 100% egg on their face. And see, Brad Edwards has been consistent here, folks. Remember, this is 2009, 11 years ago, 12 years ago almost. and Bradley Edwards was on the front line with his gloves on, punching his way up. And he makes a great point. What this shows these survivors is that Jeffrey Epstein was able to do and get away with whatever the hell he wanted, and that their lives, their dreams, their hopes meant nothing in comparison to what Jeffrey Epstein wanted. Epstein now faces many civil lawsuits filed by the women, who are represented by a variety of attorneys. In many, the allegations are the same: that Epstein had a taste for teenage girls, identified poor, vulnerable ones, and used other young women to lure them to his Palm Beach mansion. They walked away with between $200 and $1,000. And the money was always for him to fall back on and cry prostitution, right? That was always the point of the money. What do you mean? I didn't rape anybody. I paid her. I'm just a John. And that was always going to be the defense, and they used it to a T and perfectly to get him out of that jail sentence the first time around. Former circuit judge Bill Berger, also representing survivors, called the agreement a sweetheart deal. Why was it so important for the government to make this deal, Berger said rhetorically. We have not yet had an honest explanation by any public official as to why it was made, and why the survivors were sold down the river. And even back then, the fury of people who were involved in the case is apparent, and the shock and discontent is apparent. It is gross what occurred here, folks. I mean gross. Former federal prosecutor Ryan McCabe described the agreement as very unorthodox. Yeah, that's an understatement. Such agreements, he said, are usually reserved for corporations, not individuals. Well, yeah, corporate overlords, you can't really destroy the golden goose, right? We've established that. If you're a banker or a corporate overlord, boy, you get hooked up. You get to live your life. We'll have a deferred prosecution, whatever that means, for your stealing of $500 billion. It's such a shell game, and it's so rigged. It is so damn rigged. I don't know how anyone can look at the whole system and not shake their head in disgust. It's very, very rare. I've never seen or heard of the procedure that was set up here, said McCabe, who has no involvement in the Epstein litigation. Now, this is an ex-prosecutor, folks, right? You know, I always say, I'm not a lawyer. I have no idea, but from the way where I'm sitting and from what I see, well, looks like this lawyer certainly agrees. This kind of shit does not happen. He's essentially avoiding federal prosecution because he can afford to pay that many lawyers to help those survivors review their cases. If a person has no money, he wouldn't be able to strike a deal like this and avoid federal prosecution. It's so sick. God, the way these girls were preyed upon by Epstein and the Department of Just Us. It is absolutely obscene. The backroom deal with federal prosecutors is all the more interesting in light of the legal powerhouses who have worked for Epstein, including Harvard professor Alan, I kept my underpants on Dershowitz, and Bill Clinton investigator Kenneth Starr. Lefcourt is a past president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. And those guys alone right there constitute some of the most powerful lawyers in the land at the time and still to this day. Gerald Lefcourt, Kenneth Starr, Alan Dershowitz, those are all high-profile attorneys, even though they're scumbags. Epstein's local defense attorney, Jack Meoff Goldberger, issued a statement Friday saying he had fought the release of the sealed agreement to protect the third parties named there. Mr. Epstein has fully abided by all of its terms and conditions. He is looking forward to putting this difficult period in his life behind him. He is continuing his long-standing history of science philanthropy. Let me translate that. He's looking forward to continuing to abuse and destroy lives, and nobody's going to stop him, and he'll use his charitable givings as a shield. That makes more sense, right? The investigation triggered tensions between police and prosecutors, with then Palm Beach Chief Michael Ryder saying in a May 2006 letter to then State Attorney Barry Krischer that the chief prosecutor should disqualify himself. I continue to find your office's treatment of these cases highly unusual, Ryder wrote. He then asked for and got the federal investigation that ended in the sealed deal. And Ryder was one of the only heroes in this whole case, in my opinion. Chief Ryder was an OG, triple OG in this case. He did real good work, real good investigative work, and he delivered a case to prosecutors that should have been a slam dunk. I'm talking Shaquille O'Neal over Spud Webb level slam dunk. But no, they screwed it up. They found a way to be, air quotes, negligent. They found a way to, air quotes, exhibit poor judgment. And meanwhile, Jeffrey Epstein and his band of disgusting abusers continued on their merry way. The Jeffrey Epstein matter was an experience of what a many $million defense can accomplish, Ryder told the Palm Beach Daily News upon his retirement. And it's so true, right? That's another thing we talk about quite a bit here on the podcast. If you got ducats and you got some fazools and money and you can afford these top-line lawyers, even if you're guilty, they're going to get you off on some sort of technicality. And that is exactly what we're seeing here in this Epstein case. And we're certainly seeing it now in real time in the Ghislaine Maxwell case as they search for that hole, as they search for that chink in the armor of the prosecution to latch onto that technicality and to have one of these scumbag judges rule in their favor. The good thing, though, is it seems that Judge Nathan and certainly Judge Preska are not playing their games and that they're pursuing justice and not looking to make friends. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links can be found in the description box. And for those of you who have donated to the podcast and who have helped out with helping me create content, sending me articles and stuff like that, I really appreciate all of you. Thank you very much. All right, folks, I'll be back later on tonight with the Daily Drop, and we will go over some of the documentation and some of the stuff that has been unsealed as of today. So, have that to look forward to, and I will catch you folks then.